Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Mundelein, Illinois. I'm Matt Monty on the NRG series. We're getting ready to kick off the next round of coverage here. So let's take a peek here at our players to watch leaderboard. So we have a little bit of a shakeup here. So as you can see, Harrison Fang at 1-1, Will Kruger, Zach Allen, and Mac Endress all 2-0. So good start to their day. Pretty rough one there for Adam Wasburn Moses and Bill Kamenos, who are trying to move up to leaderboard here at an 0-2 start. And actually, Jesse just got done playing against Bill, so Jesse is 1-1. And then Vinny Fino battling back from a 0-1 start up to 1-1. So as you can tell, that's the pretty log jammed up here early in the first couple rounds. And what that's going to look like on our overall leaderboard is really what we're getting into here. So Zach Allen, again, this is not updated with yesterday's events included, but it's pretty tight with Connor Mullally actually in the lead currently. And Connor is up to 164 points. Zach's at 160. And then Jesse is at 155 points. So real tight between those three as we continue to move through this event into this one, and then our last two events down in Louisville. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into some coverage here for round number 3. I believe we got some familiar faces that you might know if you've ever watched coverage here on the Energy Series before. So we're going to hop on down. I'll send you back to Mason and to Drake for round number 3.
Hello and welcome back. Yeah, we have Zach Allen on 4-color control. He's known for best around here. Drake and James on Izzet Murktide, a deck I think we're just going to always see a lot of when we watch Modern.
Absolutely. It's one of the calls that, I said I would play in this format, and there's a good reason for it. It is very powerful, gets to play some of the most powerful cards available in the format, which fortunately are in blue and red, and that happens to be one of my favorite color combinations in Magic. So I'm very much about it as I see a turn 1 Dragon's Rage Chandler coming down for James. Zach Allen sporting a control strategy as he often does. This matchup used to be very, very familiar, but with Yorion in the command zone. That card now banned. Kaheera has taken its place, and we have a 4-color mana base and a beautiful deck at that. As Windswept Heath is going to find a Sacred Foundry.
Boom, bam, yeah. And this is a matchup. It looks like we're probably casting Prismatic Ending too on this DRC, and we're just shortcutting a little bit. But This is a matchup too that traditionally was very bad for Izzet Murktide during the Yorion era. This was one of the matchups you wanted to play as the 4-color Yorion player, which was part of the reason Murktide always one of the most popular decks in the Modern field. Very fun. It's kind of a deck style that a lot of people like to play, and you are so good against it. Things have changed a little bit since the Yorion banning. It is not as easy to always actually close the game out, and we see things like James playing 1 main deck Blood Moon this weekend along with 3 Spell Pierces. So he's going to have some more game in spots, but it's still going to be an uphill battle.
Absolutely. Here's Dragon's Rage Chandler number 2. The name of the game for the Murktide deck very frequently is getting an early threat into play. Ragavan is actually one of your best cards in this matchup, especially in the absence of something like a Wrenn and Six. That card can be extremely problematic, but always is going to be in these grinding matchups anyway. But you really want to get underneath. You talk about tempo and, what that looks like in action, very much like getting to the board early and then protecting it with counterspells and removal spells. That's very much what Murktide needs to do. It doesn't really have time to play the Murktide Regent strategy as much, where you just do a lot of early interaction, then play your huge Murktide Regent and close the game there, because the 4-color deck has so many answers to Murktide Regent, as we see Misty Rainforest grabbing, I believe, a Zagoth Triome there. And stuff. I'm going to take a look at the list, make sure I got that one right.
It's a Zagoth. Yeah, it's the bug one. Black, blue, green, baby.
Cool.
You got it. Don't worry. Scalding Tarn coming down. But yeah, no, I think...
still got it.
Yeah, still got it. Easy. Yeah, I think one of the things to remember, too, is that before the backup plan, so the Murktide versus 4-color during the Yorion era was like, okay, stick something, have them fight over that, then stick Murktide plus Counterspell. And while that can sometimes work, most of the time, like Drake was mentioning, with the addition of Leyline Binding in this deck, the ways to answer Murktide has just gone up dramatically, where before it was kind of 4 Solitude and like a Teferi unsummoned to kind of like make it a little awkward on your opponent, and those are your ways of answering it. Now, though, with 4 Solitude, 4 Leyline Binding, along with the counter spells, it's actually really hard to get to that Murktide stage of the game. And while somewhat doable, it's really not as practical as it was before.
Absolutely. And we see the shock at Steam events number 3. We saw an in-step consider there. Chose to leave the card on top for both Surveil triggers. Had to have been a good one, as Mishra's Bauble here. The follow-up post untap land here. Thinking about our Surveil, Dragon's Rage Channeler, not quite Delirious yet. Needs 2 more types. We only have land instant. Going to Surveil Steam events number 3 to the graveyard off the top of the library. See if we're interested in doing the Mishra's Bauble thing now, because if we're going to do it now, I kind of think that we're trying to set up some Delirium for a big attack. Do need a sorcery or a creature in the graveyard as a follow-up. Ragavan dashed is going to help with just that, because if that one gets killed, it goes to the graveyard. You know, Dragon Channel hits harder. If not, the Ragavan's connecting, and that's really good. So here we see an attack with both creatures.
All right, what are you going to do from Zach Allen? You going to kill it? What are you going to do? Not kill it?
Well, I imagine you have to kill it. I mean, Ragavan is just such a huge problem, as the Scalding Tarn is going to find a basic island here. That one main deck Blood Moon, maybe a little bit being respected by Zach. And I think that's it. We just wanted to fetch to make sure that we would get our land, and Ragavan's going to make a treasure and hit Dress Down. I mean, that would get you a card.
Yeah, that's interesting. It is something to like kind of just, you know, move through the stuff if maybe your hand's a little land heavy. Looks like James rather hold up the treasure and the land, you know, and kind of take the draw set, maybe get something like Counterspell up, or maybe just even make Zach think about it. You know, this is in prime Teferi 3 / Jace the Mind Sculptor territory for Zach, and James has to know from the deck he's playing against that those are going to be key cards that Zach is going to want to resolve early.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to also imagine there's going to be some counterspells involved in the mix. If James isn't interested in playing the Dress Down there, just getting that free value, getting that free card, that there's probably a counterspell involved, or at least we want to respect, or at least present that there's a counterspell. So Zach, you know, doesn't play anything on his main phase, maybe in part to respect that. And Ragavan dash going to happen again. Zach fetching with the Windswept Heath in response.
Yeah. Looks like he's going to grab some cards, see what he's going to do. We maybe see a Counterspell here, despite grabbing the Plains. That might just be a concession to Blood Moon. It might also just be like a Subtlety getting hard cast.
Ooh, that'd be a pretty good one here.
It looks to be a Subtlety.
Doesn't put the Ragavan in the graveyard.
Yeah. And James in a little bit of an awkward potato situation.
What makes it a potato situation, Mason?
Well, it's awkward. And an awkward thing to say with that is to say potato, because it doesn't quite make sense.
Ah, I understand. You have enlightened me.
Oh, Mishra's Bauble's surveil the
That's
layout.
so cute.
Yeah.
Put it on top and I'll surveil it to the yard with Mishra's Bauble. I love it. And then that allows you to be forced to attack with the Dragon Chiller, which does trick the Subtlety. So a nice little 2-for-1 for Zach in exchange for his 4 mana. But a cute little trick from James. I like it.
100% is how I would say that all went down. But yeah.
We should switch roles. I should start saying like 100% or like 110%
absolutely
or something, and you should start saying absolutely. There you go.
Yeah. I think all the percent was given there, you know?
Yeah. Oh, well, can you go lower? Can you go higher? I just don't know. Flooded Strand and a
maybe you should be. If you were dumber, then I would say 100%. But you know, that's on you.
Oh, I see. All right, let's see. James needing a follow-up here. Zach, very happy to kind of just play lands and pass the turn. His cards are going to be more powerful than James's cards over time. They're worth more cards on their own. They are more expensive, but you know, if Zach is able to hit all his land drops and just, you know, take draw steps with James, I feel like Zach has to be really excited about that. And Ledger Shredder being added to the board for James, like I said, there's a lot of onus on James to get something rolling, get something started, get some pressure on Zach, so that you only need to counter the first couple very powerful cards that Zach has going on in his late game. You mentioned things like Jace the Mind Sculptor, even something like somewhat innocuous like Wrenn and Six, which only costs 2 mana, still extremely powerful over time. James needing to kind of get something started so that those cards don't run away with the game.
Yep. You know, I got to keep it $150 with you, Drake. This is something that can kind of get out of hand when these Solitudes start getting hard casted. So, you know, this is a spot where you're kind of happy the Solitude isn't hitting a Murktide, but also you're like, oh no, we've hit the hard cast Solitude portion of the game.
100%.
You know, I'm gonna keep it a dime with you, Drake.
I just can't do this to you. Solitude gonna take care of Legend Shredder. That one could hit the exile zone. A little bit of life coming for James's trouble, but either way, definitely not where James wants to be. As Zach gets the turn back with all his mana untapped, and here is a Wrenn and Six. That one a big problem for James. And you see him reaching for mana.
On God, Drake, that's really a huge problem. That is just not something we want to see. You know, if James could talk right now, we might get a sheesh from him. So, anyways, we've hit the nonsense portion of the turn cycle because honestly, Zach Allen, the driver's seat, he's kind of settling in, getting ready. Because when you resolve Solitude against this deck, it used to be a little better when you had Ephemerate in your deck and you kind of threatened to always kill future Murktide Regents. But now we kind of have, all right, we have Unholy Heat to stop it, but now we have to stop this Wrenn and Six. If it ultimates, the game is going to end. And honestly, Zach hitting all his land drops is a really important part of the game as well, even though we've already hit 6 land drops.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see, all these lands do actually come into play for Zach. I think he has access to something like a Boseiju. You can start blowing up James's lands if he wants. There isn't that many Steam Vents in the deck. We know there's already one in the graveyard and stuff. Leyline Binding going to come down, tag this Ledger Shredder, or at least attempt to. Let's see if James has something to say about it. He sure does. Here's a Spell Pierce that triggers Connive.
Yeah, Zach is like, listen, you maybe just want to connive, maybe you have another Spell Pierce. I don't know, but I'm tapping this mana. You're not tricking me.
I will find the line of tapping my 2 islands and paying for Spell Pierce. Yeah, I ain't getting got by that one. The Ryan Overturf special. As another Spell Pierce hits the bin. I have to imagine the third one has to be coming if you're willing to discard that one, and it sure is. So Leyline Binding going to get a double Spell Pierced here. Kind of like Counterspell if you squint a little bit. Does take care of the Leyline Binding.
Indubitably.
Indubitably. No doubt.
Yeah, no, but I mean, like that, like honestly, if I'm Zach Allen, my heart sinks when I see the second spell because get discarded when I have literally only a mana up. It's like, wow.
Yeah, you only have 1 mana up. It's like, okay, well, I don't know how many Spell Pierces this guy has, but the answer has to be more.
100% on that one. And you're seeing just to this, the problem with the matchup is, and this is kind of a thing I talked a bunch with the old Murktide decks, is that the game becomes kind of point and click. And for Zach Allen, Zach just needs to stop 12 threats. If we stop the DRCs, we stop the Murktide, and we stop the Ragavan, the game ends. And you can often let one go invalidated for a little while. And Zach's deck is flush with counterspells and kill spells. It is so hard for James to ever stick anything that super matters.
Absolutely. And a kind of a sign of desperation here. We just main phase a dress down to cycle a card. Ledger Shredder getting picked off the previous turn with Prismatic Ending leaves James once again with no pressure with this Wrenn and Six climbing up the ladder towards the ultimate. It's just looking for any kind of, this is one of the last turn cycles where Unholy Heat is going to work. Because, once Wrenn hits 7, Unholy Heat doesn't even kill it anymore. And an instant Memory Deluge is a great one for Zach Allen, getting not just more options, but, that flashback can be done on the next turn cycle. A lot better at finding cards than Dress Down. You get a good look. Once that Wrenn hits 7 loyalty, not only does it not die to Unholy Heat, but it threatens to Emblem, and that Emblem is going to be tough to beat with things like Prismatic Ending in the graveyard, and even something like Memory Deluge. It just doesn't matter. Like, your lands all become the best spell that you've played this game, and that's usually more than good enough to win the average game.
Yep, and this is a spot, too, where, James needs to do something that's kind of impactful, try to, end the game, but now Zach sees that and is sort of pushing his boot down the throat and be like, listen, you're going to die. I'm going to present all these threats. You haven't been able to stop what I'm doing. Here comes Jace the Mind Sculptor. How are you going to beat me if I'm brainstorming every turn? And you have to stop this Wrenn and Six. Because the moment my Wrenn and Six ults, I have infinity counterspells and this game is over.
Absolutely. Jace, of course, coming down, brainstorming right away, like you mentioned. Lightning Bolt, going to be able to pick that one off potentially. We do see Archmage's Charm at the front. Zach Allen, not interested in fighting, understands that, he's wildly ahead, right? We have Memory Deluge. We have all these cards. We have Wrenn and Six ticking up. Like, the Jace, you don't really need it. You don't even need to fight over it because it doesn't really matter as far as putting the check mark on this game. Zach, very much an embarrassment of resources to work with. So, even something like answering Jace the Mind Sculptor, not enough to even get out the counterspell. It's going to have to be better than that. And James going to need a lot of help from the top of the deck if he wants to be a competitor in this game again.
You got to agree. And it's just a thing, too, where it's like the bolt, like Wrenn and Six Ultimate is better than Jace the Mind Sculptor, just straight up. And so it's like, oh, well, if it's that way, I just, who cares? There's a lot happen.
It just doesn't matter, right? Exactly. Yeah. Like, I'll just let the Wrenn and Six win the game. I don't really care what I win the game with. All I care is I win the game. And so the Jace willing to be expendable in that situation as the Mishra's Bauble going to be cracked and another land for James Farina. That is not what the doctor ordered at all.
Yeah, it's getting really hard here too because the card that could best catch us up, right, is Murktide Regent when it comes to a creature. However, now this Teferi makes it so that if it ever resolves, we just unsummon it, and we have a bunch of counter spells. James doesn't. We can't cast counter spells. So you just have to have more cards than there are counters on this turn cycle. And Zach has 2 cards. If Zach just counters this Expressive Iteration, there's nothing James can do unless he has some weird uncounterable card.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Zach, I love the patience here by Zach Allen. You have to love it. Like, this is a man that knows control through and through and doesn't get greedy. Like, he didn't fire off the ultimate on Wrenn, right? That's something we talked about. Would probably put the checkmark on this game. But you know what's even better? Having a Wrenn and Six left over after your ultimate. You can afford to do this because there's literally no pressure from James at all, as Unholy Heat is entering the mix, going after the Teferi. Zach, once again, says, absolutely, this Wrenn is what I care about. I don't really care about my other planeswalkers. They're just kind of there. They're there to put me ahead even further. They're there to let me win this game more than I already was. And the Prismatic Ending able to be cast at instant speed thanks to Teferi Time Raveler, going to pick off the dashed Ragavan.
Yeah, and we're seeing this here. James needs to start considering conceding this game in order to have times for games 2 and 3. Zach Allen and James here have both been playing very quickly and are definitely playing at a fast pace. However, these games can get long and grindy, especially post board. And with this Wrenn and Six Ultimate, if you draw a single land and not some sicko card like Expressive Iteration, you need to consider sort of moving on in order to give yourself the best chance to win the match.
Exactly. I mean, it's very much like deciding, what does winning this game look like in the face of a Wrenn and Six emblem. You can't imagine it looks like much. Maybe Murktide Regent's involved in the mix, but I mean, we see Zach just flush full of answers. He could counter it. He could Solitude it. I mean, he can do whatever he wants. It just doesn't matter. And like you said, clock becomes a consideration because these players, neither of them are slow playing. They're all moving very, very briskly. They understand they need to get this game over with. Counterspell going to go after the Solitude that is coming after the Murktide Regent. And that is enough to bait out that Archmage's Charm from Zach Allen. And it looks like that's going to be enough. James, once again, understands he's dead. He's not beating this Wrenn and Six emblem. And we're going to move to game number 2.
Yep. Yeah. And just, a spot where the game started to get out of slipping there. James kind of waited to the point at which, he couldn't come back anymore. Once he kind of got things sort of locked up and settled in, he was able to, be like, okay, listen, now I'm fully locked out, I'll concede, but was going to play until there's a point where maybe, Zach doesn't have quite the tools to actually answer this thing. Just put him to the check real quick. Let's check out, speaking of the check, James's sideboard and see what he has to help make this matchup a little better. James' sideboard is 2 Dress Down, 2 EE, 2 Flusterstorm, 2 Mystical Dispute, 2 Seasoned Pyromancer, a Blood Moon, a Chalice, a Fury, a Subtlety, and an unlicensed Hearse. Drake, I gotta think that we're gonna want these Mystical Disputes. They seem pretty good against these counter wars. And I'm thinking Seasoned Pyromancer is pretty good for the grinding matchups here. And I kind of like Fury as just having more threats. And we've got some cards that aren't super great in our main deck.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes you can bring in things like Dress Down too, because Solitude is so effective against your Murktide Regents and stuff. So like the Dress Downs, it looks really bad in that game with James choosing to just cycle it in the face of the Planeswalker draw. I'm not sure how many Dress Downs you want, but they are actually pretty good, having additional enchantments and what have you. Once again, James does need to decide if he's interested in the Blood Moon angle at all against this 4-color mana base. We saw Zach do a great job fetching basics throughout all of game 1. And if you fetch an island and a plains, then Blood Moon is able to be Prismatic Ending after it resolves. And that's what Zach did there in game number 1. So I think actually Blood Moon, because of the way Zach played his lands, might not be good enough. But like you said, the Mystical Disputes, probably good enough. Seasoned Pyromancer, have to imagine them for this matchup. And then once again, I like the Subtlety Fury stuff because they're just good too for once if you cast them for full rate. And I think that's going to be good in this matchup.
Let's check out Zach Allen's sideboard real quick here as the players are shuffling up and they're almost ready to present. Zach has 3 Aether Gust, 2 Veil of Summer, 2 Wear Tear, 2 Flusterstorm, 2 Chalice, a Subtlety, the Kaheera that's the companion, Force of Negation, and Supreme Verdict. I gotta think Supreme Verdict's easily coming in here. That seems like a pretty easy sort of swap. And I would not be surprised just to see Chalice of the Void here. A lot of 1-mana cards from the Murktide side of things and just sort of lock them out.
Yeah, Chalice really, really appealing. Not a whole lot of 1-mana cards that are required to be 1-mana cards in Zach Allen's deck. Like even Prismatic Ending, you can still just do it for only white or whatever and have that work and get around your own chalices. So the Chalice slam dunks, I think, for this matchup. A lot of 1-mana spells in the Murktide deck. And yeah, you can pick how much of the Supreme Verdict / Veil of Summer stuff you want. Have to imagine the Verdict's good enough. Don't know if you want Flusterstorms or Veils to fight counter wars, if that's even the angle you're interested in taking. We'll see what Zach Allen decides, but I could see picking up a few of that mix of cards as well.
Yeah. And, the players are finishing up here. If you're enjoying Modern and you want to play some Modern, we have one more event in 2 weeks from now, the Louisville Showdown on December 10th through the 11th. It's 15K. If you win the showdown, you're going to make it to Energy Champs. Super exciting. You want to do that. And then Sunday, you also have a Pioneer 5K trial. Get there, get some cash, play with some friends, get some exciting magic. That's always really fun. But we're going to be doing that 2 weeks from now. So, if you're in that area or close to it, this is the furthest energy's gone to the south. Kind of like the forced little, putting their toes in the water, seeing how things come down here. And I'm really close to it. I'm hopeful, if I'm not here in the booth, Drake, I'm going to be in the streets. So you're going to see me some way involved in this tournament. I'm really excited to see what happens. As it does look like the players have resolved mulligans. Let's hop down back there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think I'm in the same boat as you. If I'm not involved in the booth, I'll be involved in the streets of that tournament. Very, very excited for that. And we'll see exactly what happens. A lot of points going on through the overall leaderboard, the Player of the Year race, very, very tight, as well as our seasonal leaderboard, which is going to have 3 people qualify. It's going to have somebody qualify, 2 people qualify. Yep. Jeez, talking is hard for the Energy Champs through that at the end of the season. So both leaderboards kind of mattering a lot. Both races that are kind of going on in parallel, extremely close. The points worth a ton. I would expect our Louisville event to be stacked.
Yeah, you're going to want to follow along with that narrative as you've been following along all weekend. And if you haven't, you want to follow along on Twitch right now as well. Click that follow button. That way you don't miss any of the action. We have some exciting narratives going on. The Player of the Year race here is Zach Allen, Jesse Robkin, Connor, all really tight. Connor top-aided one of our events yesterday, lost in the quarterfinals, started 0-2 today. So Connor in a really rough spot where it was looking to be maybe a completely dominant weekend and lock it up when it came to the leaderboard for the yearly. It's going to be a little more risky if he doesn't start salvaging some of these rounds. As we see Zach Allen in our feature match area here, 2-0 in the tournament. Jesse Robkin 1-1, and she's been known to make sicko runs in the modern tournament. She earned 150 of those points in about 1 season playing only modern. So that's an expert format for her there. So we're going to have to see what happens here.
Absolutely. This race really, really tight as we get a look. It looks like Chalice of the Void among the mix. 2 Wrenn and 6s. Have to imagine that hand has to be pretty good in this matchup. Not entirely sure what the land situation is. Zach Allen giving his hand a great look as James is continuing to shuffle up, looking for a set of playable cards. Now, the Murktide deck, you mentioned at the start of this that in the past, the 4-color deck against the Murktide deck was kind of a tough matchup for Murktide. And I in general, I'm inclined to agree. But actually, I did think it is close to like even-ish, maybe even Murktide a little bit ahead when Murktide's on the play. Because I think being on the play matters so much for these huge tempo swings with things like Ragavan and all that kind of stuff. So now with Ragavan's counterspells and sideboard cards added to the mix, I think James has a good chance if he can find a set of cards here that he likes. I think he has a good chance to make this game look quite different than what we saw there in game 1.
Yeah, I think the key to note about what your statement there is on the play with Ragavan. On the play with DRC is fine, but not nearly as important as the Ragavan is. As there are draws like this from Zach Allen's deck with a turn 2 Wrenn and 6 might just be completely and utterly backbreaking.
Absolutely. And Zach Allen picking up a land for turn. No turn 1 play from James that we see. Could have access to like cantrips and spell pierce or whatever. And it does look like we have some of that, as here's an instep consider. Now errated to officially surveil and draw a card. Like that one, kept it on top. Flooded Strand in the passing of the turn.
Yeah. And we see Zach's suddenly in a position where it's like, hey, I've got some Wrenn and 6, I've got some Chalice of the Void, I got some lands. Do I even want to play anything, though? Because James is not playing anything, and I'm just like playing into Counterspell magic. What's best for me? And do I want to trade one of these cards for Counterspell?
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's one of the hard parts of Magic. It's like when you sort of play into these things and like, how do you ride the line and like which of these important spells do you throw out here? It looks like Zach's throwing out a potential Haymaker card in Chalice of the Void, but I kind of like leading on this one, Drake, because James didn't do anything with 1 mana, and sure, James' deck has plenty of 1 mana cards you could draw later, but this one seems to be the weakest right now, and Wrenn and 6 might be something that completely warps the game as we saw in game number 1, and we want to protect that thing a little more.
Yeah, I like your call out of game number 1 where Wrenn and 6 didn't come down on turn 2. It came down on like turn 6 or 7 or whatever. It was still very, very dominant. So like you said, you want the best card for the time, and Chalice of the Void definitely fit the bill. And eating a Spell Pierce is a good exchange for James, but with no pressure to follow up. I mean, I have to still like Zach Allen's position here, having plenty of action to follow up on. He's happy to just keep casting spells, keep using his mana every turn, while James is just passing the turn back, not cracking his Flooded Strand, although he does have a third one now, but did miss a land drop, it looks like, and no pressure. Zach's fine to just, okay, I mean, I can use my mana every turn, and you're not pressuring me, as we saw in game 1. That favors Zach Allen. So where we're sitting right now, I really, really like Zach Allen's position.
Yeah, this sort of spot where, like, listen, it looks like James just has a hand of all reactive cards. That's the game Zach wants to play. Zach doesn't want to play a game of like, oh no, you've got this DRC and I'm like barely answering it. I'm keeping up and I'm countering. Nah, Zach wants the game to go long. And as long as we don't have a huge fight over Murktide Regent, we fight over anything else, Zach is pretty excited to play those kind of games. That's what he came to do.
Exactly. And Zach's someone very, very familiar with the control archetype. I'm sure he's played against Murktide a ton. Very, very intimately familiar with the ins and outs of this particular matchup. And when it's already a tough matchup to begin with, that's a tough spot to be if you're James Farina looking to take down one of our best performing players on the NRG series this year. As here comes Wrenn and Six, number 1, of course.
Yep.
Counterspell going to be fired off very quickly on that copy of Wrenn and Six. The players both doing some shuffling and cutting.
Yeah, and you see Zach, earlier protected that card a little bit, but then drew Teferi 5, the hero of Dominaria, and it's like, okay, maybe this is something I want to actually resolve. And if I can get James to use the Counterspell mana now, James over behind, I might be able to trick James into going like Expressive Iteration into a threat, and then I slam Teferi and take over the game.
Exactly. And like with these exchanges, I mean, they're not great for Zach, right? Getting yourself counterspelled isn't ever really awesome, but it's a lot better when there's no threat in play. I can't stress this enough. Murktide having no threat in play is so good for Zach, because when you have a threat in play backed up by counterspells, there's a set number of turns the game is going to be played from that point. Your life total is dwindling down for every card that you play that doesn't work. Your life total just goes down and down and down. But with Murktide not having any real like card advantage engines like Planeswalkers and stuff like that to keep the flow of counterspells coming, Zach has enough powerful cards in his deck. He can play one every single turn, and eventually James will run out of counterspells. And that's very much kind of the posturing Zach's doing here as he fetches with a Flooded Strand once again.
Yeah, Zach's really looking to draw like 2, maybe 3 more lands, and then no more lands for a little while, and just kind of hope that James stays in this sort of stuck on mana position.
Yeah, for sure. And with that 5th mana source actually representing quite a bit for Zach Allen, I think there's multiple copies of Solitude in his hand that now are able to be hard cast whenever he wants. Kaheera going to be put into play. That thing does put on some pressure, but overall it doesn't really matter that much. Like, the companion is nice to have, and it is a free card, but in general, this is not like a core part of the 4-color control game plan, and it's very much just Zach Allen respecting that he's going to win if he gets to use his mana more efficiently than James does over multiple turns. And so Kaheera is just a way for him to use his mana as we pass the turn back, and Murktide Regent being put on the stack for James Farina, delving out the entire graveyard.
Yeah, and this is the play pattern we kind of talked about before, right? Where of old, it was Murktide plus Counterspell. That was what you tried to set up and do, and you do it on spots like this, and you can't punish Zach. If Zach, obviously, James kind of went for it because the Kaheera was played, but if Zach had just kept saying draw, go, James can't do this play because Zach gets to go Solitude, you counter it, and then goes, okay, another Solitude, or something along those lines. Maybe it's a Fairy Tuck. So it's one of those spots where it's like, okay, this is sort of the end game I need to have happen if I'm going to win. And like you mentioned, Murktide Regent ends the game really quickly. There's not many turns left after that happens. It looks like Zach picked up a Prismatic Ending, and so we might see a Teferi get pitch cast. I'm sorry, a Solitude get pitch cast in order to get rid of this Murktide.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, especially if this first one doesn't work. We'll see if it does work. And it looks like based on that fetching that the answer to that is most likely no. Something like a dress down could be a good one to respond with as well. Although could do something like a double block. If you dress down, you could double block with Kaheera in Solitude if that's something Zach's interested in. It is just a counterspell going to answer the first copy of Solitude. Now, Murktide's big enough that like typically you can take a few hits if you're Zach Allen and just be like, okay, whatever, I'm gonna use my mana on my turn, but on my terms. But Murktide does so much damage that really he can only kind of take one hit. So if this next Solitude, gets answered by any form of counterspell, of which James has been through a lot, he actually might be in a little bit of trouble. As we see that one jammed right away, not waiting for combat for Solitude. Could be something, respecting Archmage's Charm or whatever. Also allows you to, I guess, clear the way for attacking. It's Subtlety. The response from James looks like a Mystical Dispute is pitched, and I think there's a Flusterstorm in Zach's hand that does not counter that Subtlety.
Yeah, Zach went with a line of trying to do this, I think, to set up Teferi on the next turn, but if he had just played the Teferi with the Flusterstorm up, it would have ended up so much better for him. And now he has to dodge Bolt for the remainder of the game. Zach's deck does not gain life outside of Solitude, and there's a real chance that Solitude doesn't resolve. James hasn't drawn any more lands since the 4th one, and it was stuck on 2 lands for so long.
Right. And I mentioned this kind of play pattern doesn't normally work against 4-color control for a lot of the reasons we're seeing, right? James has already been through a lot of counter spells. Murktide Regent did get a few hits in, but Zach has so many removal spells. And, now at 1 life point, Zach finally found one that works in the 3rd Solitude. And, James is suddenly on the back foot immediately because if this Solitude connects with that Kaheera buff, Bolt's not going to work anymore. And, a whole host of things begin to close as, James's life total is going to be sapped. Zach's going to go upstairs, and the game's going to end pretty quickly. As here is a 5 mana Teferi, Hero of Dominaria.
Yeah, and we're seeing Zach here, gaining some life, putting the pressure on James, and James on a 2-turn clock with Teferi generating extra cards for Zach, and James needs to rip something like Expressive Iteration here just to get multiple cards and get back in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really doesn't even have that many turn windows to do it. It has to be like right here. It can't happen later. This Teferi is going to, draw Zach a lot of very powerful cards. And there is the sideboard Seasoned Pyromancer you called out. And that's going to discard a Spell Pierce, get a little bit of help, and 2 more cards coming. That could be a piece of the puzzle. That could be a big one here.
Yeah, this is actually huge. The Spell Pierce was basically dead for the remainder of the game. Zach had got to the 7 mana and was clearly playing around it. And now we've got a bunch of bodies, and now the Solitude will die if it attacks. Obviously, it's going to take 2 creatures with it. But, it's going to gain you a little life, put you in a pretty good spot.
Absolutely. James assembling something. The Seasoned Pyromancer looking impressive. Zach, of course, still at a somewhat precarious life total at 4. But Teferi, being able to untap with Teferi and a reasonable board presence of his own with Kaheera and Solitude, still have to like Zach's position. But James, putting up a fight.
100%.
See what Zach comes up with.
It is going to be interesting to see what happens on this turn because Zach can do things like, Prismatic Ending this thing and then maybe minus with the Teferi even in order to push more damage and sort of work the game towards being over. Looks like Zach's choosing to go up.
Like a kind of guy that pushes damage? No. That Teferi goes upstairs, Mason. Draw cards.
Very silly of me. Well, we should have, maybe we could. I'm just saying how cool it would have been if we tuck on the Legislator and then we Archmage just charm the token. And then we're like, oh, baby.
It's all clear. They're all gone.
Yeah. You gained all the life.
The Prismatic Ending hitting the Seasoned Pyromancer are huge because that means that James does not have access to that kind of flashback mode where you can pay 5 mana out of the graveyard, get 2 1/1s once the Seasoned Pyromancer is felled. But the Prismatic Ending taking care of that. Looks like both things attacked, and we made a trade for Kaheera. But Zach now at equal life total with James in 2 turn cycles thanks to Solitude.
100%. And we're seeing this Ragavan get dashed here, and it looks like that we're going to have the Ragavan try and hope to connect. But
how about Solitude number 4? How about that one?
Speaking of dash, I think the hopes are dashed. Yeah.
The hopes are as dashed as that Ragavan was, as Unholy Heat is the follow-up, the last card in hand for James Farina. We'll see if that Zach is willing to pull the trigger on some kind of interaction here. Looks like a Flusterstorm that we had previously didn't hit. Subtlety does hit Unholy Heat, and that's going to do it. James Farina concedes this game, and Zach Allen advances to 3-0. A huge win for him as he, continues to climb the leaderboards both this season and the overall yearly leaderboard, trying to get that Player of the Year slot. Big wins for him and a great start.
Yeah, congratulations to Zach Allen. There is a big win and sort of showing why that matchup is still sort of problematic and just showing how taking the slow approach as the Murktide player is sometimes something you just can't really get away with. You sort of maybe have to mulligan to the Murktide. Now I think that there was a mulligan 2-6 there happening, but either way, James, good try there. Still very much live for top 8 at 2-1. Keep it up. I'm sure we'll see more of Zach Allen later, especially if things go Zach's way. But I want to see some more Magic. Let's go back down to our time-shifted match and see our backup feature match, which I believe, Drake, is Raugrin Triome on Joe Lissette, our commentary brethren, versus Jeskai Control. I'm kind of having to shake my eyes here. Is this 2014? What's going on?
Yeah, I have no idea what year it is. We got Joe Lissette on coverage. We got Tron versus Jeskai. I mean, this is awesome stuff. Both players sitting at 1-1. David Delgado was in top 8. We saw a lot of him playing Izzet Phoenix yesterday, and not as much today as his run was ended pretty quickly in top 8. Now paired against Joe Lissette. He's playing Jeskai Control versus Trons. Joe played a lot of Tron in his day. And it looks like a Flagstones of Trocaire and Prismatic Ending going after Chromatic Star.
Yep.
Nice little interaction there. Prismatic Ending's normally pretty dead against the Tron deck. Able to find a target there and deny Joe Lisette a card as Chromatic Sphere comes down and is very quickly cycled, likely making green mana.
I have to agree. And I think one of the things to remember about Joe is someone who likes to master a deck, kind of really understand it and stick to it and kind of learn. So we see in Pioneer, Joe got his qualification last week. Congratulations, Joe, at the RC playing Lotus Field. Kind of always plays Lotus Field. And Modern kind of always plays Tron. And Legacy used to always play Miracles, and has had a lot of success with this sort of like, hey, I'm going to master my archetype, understand it, and pivot around with it. I don't super care how, like, if it's the best thing in the weekend, as long as it's just not the absolute worst thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, big fan of finding something he likes and doing that thing. Now, something to note about this Jeskai Control deck, it is the Lotus Field deck. This is something I believe that was originated by Aspiring Spike, or at least he played a lot of it on stream. This is a Blood Sun deck that is trying to kind of cheat out Lotus Fields. But as you see here, you can also just kind of do it the fair way. Sacrifice 2 lands, Flags into Trocaire, kind of a weird one in normal Jeskai Control, but does work very nicely with Lotus Field. As you see here, able to go grab a Plains-typed card. Raugrin Triome qualifies. So now we get to kind of a little bit of a land spike from 2 mana to 4 mana, although it all enters tapped. And there's some cute tricks that can happen with this Lotus Field with things like Teferis and all kinds of stuff to not just cheat out the Lotus Field, but abuse it once it's in play.
Also, really big for David Delgado in this matchup. So often, Ulamog, Karn will go after the lands for the Jeskai Control player and just make it so you can't actually interact. Now, that Lotus Field got hexproof. You can't Ulamog it. And so no matter what, Delgado is going to have 3 mana up for the remainder of the game. And so Delgado can protect these lands long enough to get that second Lotus Field down. We might see a game where typically the problem is, oh, I don't have any mana. I can't do anything. Sundering Titan beat me. This Karn beat me, or whatever. Not the case in this game, potentially.
Absolutely. And here is the namesake Teferi that is able to untap the Lotus Field. That really, really cute with cards like Cryptic Command, all these 4 mana effects that you will see. Well, there's 4 Memory Deluge, 4 Cryptic Command supported in this Lotus Field deck. And that a big reason is this exact interaction where your Teferis will untap Lotus Field plus another land, and that gives you the 4 mana you need. And of course, Lotus Field, very, very good at casting Cryptic Command because normally that restrictive triple blue, exactly what Lotus Field wants to do. And here is Karn liberated for Joe Lisette. That one, like you mentioned, would love to go after Lotus Field, but cannot because Lotus Field is hexproof. So we'll see where Joe decides to point his Karn liberated, either at Delgado's hand, some permanents, and it is going to go after the Teferi.
Yeah, this is sort of the start of like, okay, well, I can't hit the land, so I'm just going to make sure that you can't do anything super impactful as we play the Karn here. And I think Delgado might be having another Teferi in hand. It was kind of hard to see there, but if he does, he has, Teferi into second Lotus Field, untap both Lotus Fields, have more mana than he started the turn with, and a new Teferi in play. Now, obviously, that Karn is going to be a problem if that happens. Maybe you could tuck the Karn or something like that. But, that's like a powerful interaction. While maybe it doesn't line up perfectly here, it is something that is like, okay, like, this is something my deck can do. Like, be aware of that and the strength of playing a deck like this.
Absolutely. And you see a little bit of Oracle text being read by the players. It is something you have access to in every single game you play at Comp REL. Call a judge. You can get some Oracle text. If you need a reminder, reading cards is broken. I can't say it enough. And here is that Teferi that is going to have to go after that Karn. Going to go third from the top. Not the best way to do it because Tron is a deck with cards like Ancient Stirrings, plenty of like little artifact cyclers. Actually pretty good at finding cards that get tucked again. But that Karn sticking around is absolutely not acceptable for David Delgado. That can go after the Teferi right away. Whereas now there's at least a little bit of time for David to find a counterspell or some kind of other effective answer against the Karn that will hopefully allow him to keep his Teferi around. As we go back to Joe's turn.
The matchup's also pretty hard, so sometimes you just gotta hope that like nothing good comes down and you're just living your best life, and that they don't have the stirrings, they don't have anything like that.
Oh no! Well, how about Ugin? Is that a good one?
That's not living your best life.
Snipe off that Teferi. That is no good. David Delgado has to be one of the worst ones you could possibly see because normally Ugin, for it to answer things, has to like down tick because like a Ghostfire isn't normally good enough. But with Teferi that just down ticked, it is in prime position to get picked off by Ugin, and we see maybe a Desperation Valakut Awakening being cast here by Delgado.
I'm just impressed you pulled out the Ghostfire reference for the viewers. That's a deep cut. As we do see the Valakut Awakening, like you mentioned, that's correct on that card. We're going to put some cards back and draw that many +1. Yeah, I am pretty worried if I'm David Delgado about how I'm going to win. Although we did find another Teferi. Unfortunately, we're only 2 turns away from that card coming back, which I think we've created a little bit of a loop.
Yeah. I don't know if this is good or not. We're just gonna tuck every good thing Joe plays, so eventually the entire top of his deck is just all good cards. I think there's a limit to how much of that kind of stuff we can do. But Delgado electing not to deploy Teferi and instead pass the turn with all his mana up. Quite a bit of mana up this turn. Wonder if it's something like a Cryptic Command. That could be a really good one here. Could counter something, potentially bounce Ugin and kind of constrict Joe's turn. Joe astutely firing off the Ghost Fire. First, if there is something like a Cryptic Command involved, you don't want to leave free value on the table. So we're going to go ahead and plus up that Ugin. That one's going to go upstairs. And Ugin now, I believe, threatening to ultimate?
Yeah, 10's the ultimate, and then you draw 7 and put 7 things in. And Ulamog's here. Speaking of threatening ultimate, this thing basically ultimates on cast. And it's only going to get 2 lands this time. But, Delgado's like, that's enough. Let's take a minute.
Yeah, that is more than enough. Delgado willing to pick it up there, and I can't say that I blame him. And this is the exact sequence you used to see with there may be new cards involved, but the old Jeskai Control modern Tron matchup circa whatever it was 2015. This is very much the interaction, right? Where these planeswalkers come down, they answer lands, Ulamog comes down, they blow up your lands are gone, you can't cast these spells, the game ends. And despite the hexproof land, the Lotus Field being involved in the mix, exact same kind of play pattern came up here.
100%. Let's check out Delgado's sideboard real quick from the Jeskai player. See if there's anything to help this matchup. Tron, not a deck that's too popular these days. So Delgado has 2 Ovar, 3 Wear Tear, 2 Flusterstorm, 2 Recipes, 2 Tail's End, 1 Kaheera, that's the companion, March of the Lord Light, and 1 Nexus of Fate. I'm going to keep it $150 with you, Drake Sasser. I think these Wear Tears are about all we can do, and they're not very good.
No, yeah, those aren't overly exciting. In fact, maybe something like the March is more exciting. The Orvars, of course, respect to specifically creativity. Can't imagine they're great in other matchups. Other than that,
Tail's End.
Tail's End, yeah,
we can get the trigger.
Well, I think it counters legendary spells, right? So that gets the planeswalkers at least.
It gets the planeswalkers, gets the Ulamog, but you can also get the trigger, which I like. I know it sounds like I'm joking, but if you can counter the trigger of the Ulamog and then tuck it or whatever, or Solitude the Ulamog, killing Ulamog is actually very easy in Modern these days. The hard part is the 2 things that it gets on the way. So yeah, absolutely. I guess it's Tail's End, Wear Tear.
Yeah. Right. I think the Tail's Ends are going to be quite good talking through it like that. Yeah, maybe some numbers of Wear Tears. Can't imagine we're interested in the Nexus of Fate here. I don't know if that one's what we're trying to do, but hey, maybe there's a piece of inevitability in this matchup that maybe can allow you to put the check mark on a game that you otherwise couldn't. But
I feel like all you had to say was, I don't know if we're interested in Nexus of Fate. Anyways, let's check out Joe's sideboard, see what's going on over there.
I love Nexus of Fate.
I know you love Nexus of Fate. 2 Nature's Claim, 2 Veil Summer, a Boseiju, a Chalice of the Void, an Engineered Explosive, an Searing Bridge, Liquid Metal Coating, Sundering Titan, the Stone Brain, Thrag Tusk, 1 Tormund Script, 1 Trinisphere, 1 Walking Ballista. That's because Joe Lissette is playing Karn the Great Creator. So about, let's say 10 of our sideboard slots are wish targets, and then we have a couple real targets. I think for this matchup, we have the 2 Veil Summers, and then maybe you want to board in one of your sideboardy cards, I don't know, maybe Trinisphere or the Stone Brain is better to having your main deck over some cards you don't really like in the matchup. But I think for the most part, you're kind of pre-game for this matchup.
Right. And a lot of times you see cards like Thragtusk involved in the mix in matchups, specifically where you expect your lands to get interacted with. Now, we don't really see much of that from the Jeskai Lotus Field deck, because a lot of times the Lotus Field deck's kind of relying on its 4 main deck Blood Suns to take care of its problematic lands. However, Blood Sun doesn't actually really do the job against Tron lands really at all. So now we're in a spot where the Lotus Field decks without as much land hate as you would like to try to keep Tron off of lands. And Joe probably knows that and probably doesn't need to bring in things like Thragtusk and stuff. So like you said, can probably shore up the sideboarding quite a bit and look to execute the exact same game plan he did in game number 1.
Yep. Let's see if we can hop back into the future match here. We should be done with everything and we should be resolved mulligans here. That's the benefit of time shifted magic. Let's see here. Joe is dealing out the hand, as is Delgado here. Looks like Joe has 6 cards.
Side here, a little sleeve replacement happening. So we get ready to get started here with game number 2. Joe on the draw this time. Play draw like it does in most games of Magic, mattering a lot. I would expect the counter spells coming online for Delgado going to matter quite a bit as far as, not getting drowned by a turn 3 Karn or whatever that you can't actually have an effective counter spell dialed up for. And we see a Wear Tear brought in from the sideboard and kept in hand on this mulligan to 5.
Yep, looks like Joe's on mulligan to 6. It looks like we're going to start things off here. It was just a Seachrome Coast and pass of the turn. Nothing like that in my control deck because we have an Expedition map. Well, we have a target for the Wear Tear, Drake.
We do, and it's a good one at that. Going after the Expedition map, functionally kind of like counterspelling a Sylvan Scrying feels about the same, even though it's done in a completely different manner. March of Otherworldly Light is going to be the card used instead. So flush full of answers to Expedition map. Have to say, Joe probably expected that as we see a second copy of Expedition map already dialed up and ready to go. We'll see if he's interested in deploying that one into, David's relatively low mulligan, but we do know from our perspective that David has another answer to Expedition map if deployed.
I kind of like this from Joe. Joe, I think, has another land lined up, knows David wants to use Lotus Field, and if just goes like forest, play map, crack map, that's a really good interaction for Joe.
For sure. And Lotus Field going to enter here tapped. Now, we do see, typically you want to do that with a card like Blood Sun, but game number 1, David was willing to just go ahead and fire it off, but had a Flagstones to get a little bit of extra value. There's no extra value here. This Lotus Field is just going to come into play tapped. You're going to be still at 3 mana, but it comes in tapped. The only real upside is, as you mentioned, Lotus Field having hexproof, so it can't get got by something like a Karn on this turn. But instead, Joe content to play his forest and play and crack maps so it doesn't get got by the Wear Tear in David Delgado's hand that he does not know about. And that's going to give Joe 8 mana here on this turn.
Yeah,
and Delgado, no 4th land available for Delgado.
Yeah, just staring at a Cryptic Command in hand, and it's looking rough for Delgado. Delgado top-aided our Pioneer 10K yesterday playing Izzet Phoenix, actually top 4'd. Lost in the semifinals, unfortunately, for Delgado. And, now is going to have a little bit of a rough time. But if Delgado has anything like Counterspell in hand, they might be able to stop the first sort of threat here, which looks to be a Karn the Great Creator.
Yeah, Karn the Great Creator, the first thing to come down. We'll see what Joe's interested in grabbing, if anything. May just tick up to try to keep it from, getting got by any kind of rule spells. But I have to imagine there's some kind of artifact we're willing to go get. Sundering Titan, maybe? There's Triomes in the deck, but not very good against Lotus Field. And we know Delgado's missing land drops. So we'll see what Joe comes up with. Something like a Damping Sphere would ironically
I think it's
almost even the playing field here.
If you play the Stone Brain, you can just name Cryptic or whatever, and then know what you have to play around, and then you can just grab it again because it exiles itself.
Sure, we just Stone Brain all the cards that matter.
Yeah, the first one you just hope to get lucky, and the second one you just take the card that matters from Delgado's hand.
Sure, and it looks like Joe kind of agrees with you. Stone Brain being grabbed and played. Let's get a look at that one. This is a new artifact rare from Brothers War. 2 mana to play, 2 mana to activate. Exile it. And then choose a card name, search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards with that name and exile them. That player then draws a card for each card that was got from their hand this way. You can only activate that as a sorcery. So a pretty big pickup for Mono Green in Pioneer that we saw win our Pioneer trial and looks to be pretty effective here as Ancient Stirrings is the follow-up for Joe.
Very exciting. And yeah, it looks like Joe is in a spot where it's like, well, I'm going to get some more cards, do my thing, and the next turn I'm going to start unloading on you and hopefully have, more Tron lands in order to just keep playing my huge, massive cards every turn.
For sure. And I think Joe kind of willing to shore up his turn a little bit, take multiple actions per turn here. In part, just to set up having multiple things, from this point forward, Karn the Great Creator isn't the best thing in his hand against Delgado, right? And he had a Karn the Great Creator at the start of his turn, elected to play Karn the Great Creator instead of Karn Liberated, that he had access to at the beginning of this turn. And Wear Tear going to go ahead and pick off the Stone Brain. That does not put it in exile, so we cannot do it again with Karn. But yeah, Joe not wanting to lose to one Counterspell and have to spend a turn rebuilding, and Karn the Great Creator being played here alongside some other cantrips allows him to threaten multiple things each turn from here. And Delgado missing another land drop, he says, "I'm good. I don't know what you got. I saw that you grabbed a card and liberated. I can't beat that one, much less more of them," which Joe revealed at the end of the game. And Delgado's had enough.
Reasonable. Yeah, I was actually looking at Delgado's deck list. I was trying to figure out a way for him to come back, and looks like we both agreed that one was over. But what's not over, Drake, is all the great Magic we're going to be having here at this event. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back really soon with more Modern Magic for y'all.